Welcome back to Gappleton. Today we are continuing our NV3500 torture test series. This video, there won't be any torturing of the NV3500. It's going to be the aftermath of last episode's track day. So if you recall from last episode of this little mini series, we went to the track, we tried to make some test hits with the NV3500 versus our Turbo LS, and we went nowhere. We spun the clutch. We spun it pretty good. So today we're going to be pulling the clutch, or pulling the transmission, pulling the clutch, seeing just what happened, why maybe it just didn't hold. So, yep. First things first, I'm going to get the back end of the truck up as high as I can on jack stands, and then I'm going to drop the drive shaft, stab my spare yoke into the tail of the trans so that I get the other side up and I don't puke all my fluid on the floor. Pull the trans, take a look at the clutch, and install the new one, and go from there. So let's get to it. Something to keep in mind when building your street car, race car, whatever it is serviceability. You want it to be easy to work on, easy to take out, remove, work on, yeah, all that. This training cross member is not that. This took me about an hour and a half just to pull this. So we're going to be doing a little bit of redesign when this thing goes back in. Working on trucks, you often find instances where it becomes blatantly obvious that it was a body-on-frame vehicle built from the factory, and this is one of those instances. When you have bolts that come down from the top of the frame rail through here, well, now there's a cab up here, and now you have to slip a wrench up and over and in between the body, and sure, yeah, I could undo body mounts and lift up the cab, but yeah, when the guys put this together in the factory in Detroit or whatever, who knows where it was made, but yeah, they had a lot easier time than I did. So going back together, this will not be the same. All right, so the transmission's off. With that cross member out of the way, it pops down pretty easily, and just lowered it down with the jack. No big deal. You guys have watched me struggle enough. So yeah, it looks like a brand new clutch, which I would half expect, being it's only been in here for about 100 miles or so. Gonna get these pressure plate bolts popped off, and I'm really curious to see what we find. Initial thoughts, none of these bolts were all that tight. I'm gonna have to go back and look what the torque spec was. Maybe it really doesn't take all that much. And you want to work these around in a circle because this whole plate is under spring tension from the clutch, or from the pressure plate. Now, as I start to run this tool, I'm seeing some dust dropping out of this. That would be indicative of that excessive clutch spin we talked about. Oh, yeah, you see more. Yep, a lot of debris falling out of here. A lot of material falling out of this clutch. Ta-da! All right, here is the disc. This would be the pressure plate side, and here's the clutch side. There's already, so when you're doing these LS swaps with this specific flywheel, there's always a little lip that doesn't make contact just the way the conversion happens from an old GM 10-spline clutch to an LS flywheel in my particular setup. And I can already feel a pretty good groove just from where it's been wearing. I'll have to actually measure this and see compared to the brand new one or the spec on this to see how much wear has already come out of it. So just noting some of the differences between the original Luck brand clutch that I had in here versus the new one that just came out. Obviously they both have this groove that I was talking about. This one was pretty pronounced, which says, oh great, yeah, a lot of wear in this clutch, I should change it. So I bought another one of the exact same kit because I liked this one. There's that little groove. But I'm noticing some differences. I don't know if they changed manufacturers. You can see the way that the center section is riveted on this one is different versus here. Smaller rivets. This snout that actually, where it actually slips onto the input shaft of the trans. The old one is a lot more squared off. What else? You can see the rivets are backwards, the way they actually assembled it from the factory for putting on the friction pads. You have the female side of the head of the rivet versus the male side of the rivet there. So just some differences right in the disc itself makes me think that they changed manufacturers or someone else is making these for this company now, which is pretty disappointing because I actually really liked this clutch. So yeah, not really sure. From what I can tell, the pressure plates appear to be the same. They have the same stampings, the same markings. There's a little, I don't know, 946, 946, old versus new. Makes me think that they are the same, at least in the pressure plate, but the disc is definitely different. Side note, I am doing a quick sloppy little deglaze on the flywheel. It's not grooved or any of that, but yeah, there's a slight glaze to it, so we're just gonna hit it with some 150 and then 220 and yeah, knock some of that shine out of it. Alright, I decided I'm going to go ahead and install the new clutch kit that I got. The disc, it's an 11-inch disc versus a 12-inch disc, so that little groove where it wasn't making quite as much engagement due to the adaptation from the NV3500 to LS flywheel, that groove is going to be slightly larger. All it has to do is hold up more than the transmission does, because that's supposed to be the weak link, and that's the whole point of this, is to find where it's going to fail. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to install the new clutch kit, and yeah, we're going to see what happens. Well, that ain't good. Alright, the clutch is on. It definitely has a lot more pressure than what it was like bolting down the old one. As you were tightening it up, you could feel that there was literally more tension built up in the spring force of the actual pressure plate. So hopefully that translates to more grab. And here's my answer to some improved serviceability out of this cross member. Before, it had the section that went up like this. I have removed that section and I've added captive nuts. There are 4 captive nuts added to this cross member, so now I don't have to have a wrench on top and bottom. I can simply run these 14mm bolts out from the bottom. The captive nuts will hold on the top. No more two-handed fighting with things in weird places. And then the 4 bolt holes on the bottom and the at least 4 on that side, that's going to be plenty strong enough to hold up the transmission. All right, the transmission's back in. A little tip that I like to do to get these transmissions in by yourself, on either side of these GM trans, there's 2 bolt holes and a dowel hole in the middle where there's a pin on either side of the bell housing. What I like to do is get 4 of those long bolts from your AC bracket and feed those through once the clutch, or once the whole bell housing gets close. And they're gonna act like guide rods. So once you have those 4 long bolts in those corners, once the transmission is kind of close to the engine, put those 4 bolts in and they're gonna act like guide rods as you wiggle the transmission on. It's gonna run right up those bolts and into its position. if you know what this is, you could probably imagine my frustration after the transmission was on to find out that rather than sitting like this, it's sitting like this. So the transmission comes back off. Luckily, I was able to, well, let me back up. This is the clutch fork. So what this does is it rides on this pivot point here in the middle, and the slave cylinder moves it in and out like this, pushing on this cup here, moves it in and out. And this side presses the throwout bearing in and out to actuate the clutch. It can only work one way, and I, or you know, say somebody put it back in like this. In my haste of getting this thing back together, yeah, that happened. So transmission, I had to unbolt the cross member, which I'm getting pretty good at this point. Back the trans up about 10 inches or so to the point that I could take this off, pop it off of the bearing, and now I'm going to flip it the proper way, reinstall it, put the trans back on, go back all together, and hopefully do that for the last time and get this thing back on the ground. Hopefully. Hi, me again. You may be wondering, James, why are you holding a header? Well, I'd like to take a moment to talk to you about scope creep. What is it? How does it happen? Why do we care? Scope creep is when the project gets bigger than you expected or originally planned for. In my case, it would be a V-band that is not actually welded to the header. Or it was, and now it isn't. This is a Speed Engineering C10 header. It has a scoop out of it from its former life in a Mazda B2200. But yeah, its V-band is no more V-banding. This weld, I don't think there's even any filler metal in this weld. From how thin it is and the way it cracked and stuff, I think it was literally just fusion welded with the base metals together. So, to its credit, it's gonna line up really nice when I go to weld it back together here in a moment. But it's a shame that they didn't do a better job from the start. So, yeah. Now I got a little welding to throw in the mix here. All right, so everything's back together, clutch is back in, it's all back to every nut and bolt. So you're about to see the first test drive in real time. Let's hope it works.